everyone, and welcome in to the Bear Down Buzz podcast. As always, myself, Eli, joined by Isaac and Joe. Fellas, and I mean a lot has happened since the Thanksgiving loss to Detroit that ended once again in embarrassing fashion. Matt Eberflus had a timeout left with just around 30 some odd seconds left. The Bears looked like they were in range to get maybe into field goal range. Now, Caleb Williams took a sack, which kept the clock running. There was some mishaps with communication. They ran another play at the end of the game, and the clock expired with the Bears having one more timeout remaining. And after that, everything kind of imploded on itself. You hear about stories going into the locker room. Matt Eberflus gives his usual speech at the end of the game, but this time it was different because Jalen Johnson, bless his heart, he's been here 5 years. He had enough, spoke up very vocally. It was reported that there was a lot of colorful language, and we can talk more about this later. But uh, whether it remains to be seen how much of an impact that had on the firing of Matt Eberflus, because it was reported that he is no longer the head coach of the Chicago Bears. Fellas, it's been a long time coming, to say the least. Matt Eberflus, again, no longer the head coach of the Chicago Bears. We've been talking about it for weeks. It just seems like rubber finally hit the road for this organization, and they saw that it can no longer be the case that we can't keep losing these close ones and just can't seem to finish games. Isaac, I'll start with you. Kind of your general thoughts before we get into these press conferences later by Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles, but just your general thought process on the firing of Matt Eberflus, head coach of the Chicago Bears, former now. Your thoughts just on the general fallout and the process in which he was let go by the Chicago Bears organization.
Yeah, I think it was something that had to be done and it should have been done a long time ago. But it gets to a point where you really have to look at yourself internally if you're the Chicago Bears organization and how long can they let this happen without doing anything? I do applaud them for firing Waldron earlier as well because he was a major issue and we have come to find out about it right now, where he basically scrapped the run game and it really messed up what we were having, especially with one of the best rushing games in the NFL last season. But it was something that should have been done, and it was finally. I'm as much as I've been critical of Matt Eberflus, he is still a human being, so. Um, it's just like he just wasn't a good coach, and it sucks that we had to fire him in this way a day after Thanksgiving. But it, that whole sequence where he didn't call the timeout, and you just can't let a rookie quarterback be in charge of that. It's not. I mean, there's some blame to go around with Caleb and Matt Eberflus, but there's just been so many instances throughout this year and in prior years where Eberflus has failed to be a leader of men. He has failed to really put the Bears in situations to win. And, you know, I think this is a good opportunity for this team to get a look at Thomas Brown and to see if he is actually a viable option for a long-term, head coach for this team. I personally have been really impressed with everything I've seen from Thomas Brown, from his press conferences, the way he carries himself, the way he takes accountability, which is something that Eberflus failed to do. And I really liked how he's basically transformed not only this offense, but Caleb Williams as well. So he's going to have 5 games to show us what he can do. I know a lot of fans are very skeptical because he doesn't have the experience as a head coach. And, he's been in this building, he's been part of the everything that's been going on this season. And he's talked about it in his press conference, which we'll get into later, where he is still taking accountability from the actions that have happened in recent games. He's been on this coaching staff. Has had he's been able to be in positions to have this Bears team win, and unfortunately that hasn't been the case. But we'll see. Well, I'm rooting for Thomas Brown. I really like him as a person. I think he's a good coach, and we'll see what ends up happening these next 5 games. So I'll toss it over to you, Joe, and your thoughts on everything that's happened surrounding Matt Eberflus and this Bears organization.
Yeah, for sure. first, I want to start off by saying to anyone listening, I hope you had a good Thanksgiving. I know the Bears lost and it got screwed, but at least we got an early Christmas present, which I don't think anyone thought we were going to get, which is where I want to start because I'm super surprised this happened. I didn't think they were going to fire him on Friday. My dad was telling me if they lose, they're going to fire him. I was like, I don't think so, not at all. But they did. I'm happy they did because he deserved to be fired after past 6 weeks. Again, like Isaac said, you having a coach be fired is not like it's not the best for him, obviously, because he's been working all his life to be head coach, and it sucks as a on the human side of things. But he just wasn't a good head coach, and he needed to be gone. Um, but yeah, I think the sorry, I think I was most surprised that they had Eberflus go out there in the morning for the 9 a.m. press conference after the game, and then fired him 2 hours later. I figured that he was going to still be the head coach because he had that press conference. Um, now I I guess they were still in the middle of the meeting or the meeting had just started when Flus gave the press conference, so he that's why they didn't. That's why he was giving the press conference because they hadn't made a decision yet. But the issue with that is like push the press conference back. They do that all the time. Why didn't you do that? You could have done that. You wouldn't have had Pat Flus talk and said that he'd be there for San Francisco this week. Um, and then uh yeah, that we wouldn't be getting criticized by the national media for everything that just happened with the firing of Flus because everyone thinks it's a bad look and it is a bad look. I mean, come on. But yeah, I just think it was time. It was probably time to fire Flus after the Patriots game, and you can even argue that he should probably have been fired before the season even started, but they didn't do that in either case. But yeah, he's gone. Onwards and upwards, like you said. This is, like you said, Isaac, a 5 game tryout for Thomas Brown. I have confidence that he can be a good interim head coach, just given what we heard from uh, the press conference today, and also just what everyone's been saying about him. Even from that goes from players to Sean McVay to anybody that you ever anybody that ever talks about Thomas Brown gives glowing reports. So I think at least in this 5 game sample size, he can show he can if he can lead this team. I feel very confident that he should be in very strong consideration for the head coaching position next year season. We'll talk more about that obviously as we go to the end of this episode. But yeah, I'll pass it back over to you, Eli.
Yeah. So, as you guys kind of mentioned, first time in the Bears organization's history that we fired a coach mid-season, and it is surprising, but it's not surprising to me that it was Matt Eberflus being the one that was fired. He was. I think we can all agree at this point arguably, if not the worst Bears head coach of all time. Before that, it was Mark Trestman. That was most people's conception, most people's idea. But I would be hard pressed to find an argument against Matt Eberflus at this point, being the worst. So it is super encouraging to me that whether it was the ultimate decision having to convince the McCaskies to make the move and eat the money for the remaining years of his contract, but it is a step in the right direction. It doesn't give me automatic confidence now that the McCaskies are going to be a top 5 ownership group in the league, and it's not going to happen. There's a lot of work to be done, but it is a step in the right direction. Now, on Monday, the media was made available to interview Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles as well as Thomas Brown. We'll start basically in the timeline that things happened with Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles. Their opening statements, first, Kevin Warren, was really just a lot of, executive speak, I guess is the right way to put it, saying how, the Chicago Bears are the best fan base in the world and they deserve more than this. And we made the move to get rid of Eberflus and blah, blah, blah. But it definitely and Isaac, I'll start with you first. It definitely gave me the vibe, and a lot of people, that Kevin Warren has finally kind of stepped into this role of overseeing more of the football side of things. And as for Ryan Poles, and again, I'll get your thoughts as well, Isaac, but Ryan Poles didn't seem as confident as he normally is in these press conferences, at least in my opinion. Uh, but Isaac, I'll start with you. Your kind of thoughts on the Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles talking to the media, as well as Thomas Brown, which you can also get into.
Yeah, and basically what because I was on Bears Twitter first before I actually watched the press conferences. So this is kind of just I think the general consensus of what happened. First, yeah, like you mentioned, Eli, I think Kevin Warren is by far a better speaker. He basically it seems like almost he was a politician the way he was speaking. He does carry himself with a lot of pride, and he looks like a very confident person. And I think he had a good interview in terms of what he was trying to get the message across. But for Ryan Poles, this he kind of looked like he was almost on a short leash. Like he was a little just tired from all this that was been going on. Um, and we talked about this, you and I earlier, about how when they asked him about Shane Waldron and the decision to, that whole process of hiring him and then firing him, he kind of had a couple seconds to really gather his thoughts. And you know what? Like he messed up, he made a mistake. Um, and he just I don't know. It just seemed like this was the first press conference I've seen from Ryan Poles where he kind of looks like an outer shell of himself. Like he's not really who we've seen in the past. Um, and I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but I do think Ryan Poles does deserve another chance, and he is gonna get that chance because they did announce that he's gonna stay as the general manager. He's made a lot of mistakes, sure, but he's also owned up to them. And I liked how Kevin Warren was basically saying like, there's two types of people. There's those people that find fault, and then those people that find fault and come up with solutions for it. And that's kind of what Ryan Poles is. Like he's made mistakes in the past, he's owned up to them and I hope that, going into this offseason, he really addresses all these critical mistakes and stuff that he hasn't really addressed as a GM for the Bears, which is like, we got to address the offensive line, the defensive line. We got to be able to attack in free agency and the draft, do a better job of addressing critical needs. Um, but that's basically my thoughts on Ryan Poles. And then moving over to Thomas Brown, I think he carries himself extremely well, and he not only has gained respect of the players in the locker room and the organization, he's gained my respect as well. I am really hopeful that Thomas Brown can help turn around this team. And I actually have I think I could take a little bit of life lessons away from what he was talking about. And there's this one part of the press conference where he was saying, there's a lot of decisive people in his life. Like his parents were both decisive. His older sister was really decisive. His wife of 16 years is really decisive. And that's how he kind of he was basically saying like that's how I am as a person. And we basically like he splits out like if there's negativity outside from like the people he was saying people would send him stuff and he would basically like ignore it and I think that's a really good thing because there's a lot of negativity outside the building for Thomas Brown but that's I really have high hopes for him and I'll toss it over to you Joe and your thoughts on all this from the press conferences.
Yeah, I'll start with Pulse and Warren. So yeah, it was Warren. Played like you guys or like you said, Isaac is definitely the more confident one. At least this press conference. Although a lot of the stuff he was saying was like business slash. He does sound like a politician. He was just saying things to say them. Like uh, especially in his opening remarks, like the three reasons that he named off why a coach wouldn't be here, which for fans, um, the way they run things, which is kind of crazy because like they just fired 2 coaches in the season, the first time ever, and their cultures kind of went out the window. Like, what are you talking about, bro? You don't have really anything right now. Um, and then I think I forget the other thing that he mentioned, but all the three things that he really mentioned didn't really like weren't that significant, especially because every owner, every coach is gonna gas up their fans because that's just what you do. Um, so like that's kind of the politician speak, and then like you said, Ryan Poles kind of just look shell shocked. Now we saw on uh, um, Hard Knocks this year that he doesn't like he takes it hard firing people, and we know that he loved Eberflus, so obviously took it hard firing Flus, but like needed to be done, and all of the pressure now is being put on him by Kevin Warren. Like Warren put the pressure on him, saying he's going to be the one that's uh, doing this head coaching search. So if this head coaching search doesn't work out, Poles is going to be gone. Uh, sorry, if this head coach doesn't work out, Poles will be gone with the new head coach. Now we're gonna look. We're not gonna hope that happens. We're not gonna look that far in the future, but that's him putting all of the um, onus on Brian Poles right now. But also, I think one of the most interesting uh, parts of Poles' press conference was the fact that he was. I, I forgot what I was going to say. Never mind. Don't remember what I was going to say. Um, yeah. And then I'll go with Thomas Brown now. If that thought comes back to my head, I will say it. But I'm gonna go with Thomas Brown now. Um, yeah, I Thomas Brown's press conference. I liked everything he said. He sounds like a leader. Uh, he took accountability for stuff, which is something Flus hasn't never did in 3 years. He did it in 10 minutes, um, which is insane. I mean, but that's what you need from a head coach. He also just speaks like he's a good speaker. He's a good communicator, which we've been hearing ever since he became the OC. So just hearing it more now in the next 5 weeks was really going to tell us what we need to know about him as a head coach. Um, and he did confirm that he's going to be on the field, which is everyone knew. Like he joked like he was thinking at some point of being in the booth, but you don't do that as a head coach. You got to be on the field. Um, But yeah, he just took accountability for the uh like said he's giving the team more discipline on penalties and stuff. Like the pre-snap and post-snap penalties. He talked about them and how they need to fix that, which is something again that Flus never did. He always pointed the execution, but he never said what he was doing to make it better. Thomas Brown actually did say they talked about it. They're going to make it better, which I have belief that it's going to happen. Now there's 5 games left. I don't know how much better it can get in 5 games, but hopefully it gets slightly better in 5 games than it has been all year. Uh, and then he also confirmed, which this isn't that big news, but because he was named the DC at the beginning of the year, but since this was the coach, Flus was calling the defense, but Eric Washington is going to be calling the defensive plays from now on, which I think I assumed would happen. You guys probably did too. Um, but yeah, I think those are my biggest uh, takeaways right now from those press conferences. I'll pass it back over to you, Eli.
Yeah. So another thing that really kind of stuck out to a lot of people from Kevin Warren, I'll kind of circle back to Kevin Warren. He did say that, and again, this is executive speech and it's talking about your own organization. But he did say this will be the most coveted job in the NFL this next hiring cycle. And I don't necessarily disagree, just because we can all kind of agree that obviously this roster has underperformed. Um, and there's just too much talent on this roster to have the record that we have. And they obviously made the change to get rid of Eberflus and Waldron, who were the two arguable main pieces in that underperformance of this roster. Uh, that was Kevin Warren saying it will be the most coveted job in the NFL hiring cycle this year. Ryan Poles also announced that obviously Caleb Williams' development is going to be a key piece of this hiring cycle. So the next head coach to come in, that's probably aside from winning, obviously priority number one is making sure that Caleb's development uh, is still on that incline, and he's just only going to get better and better throughout his career. Because at this point, you don't want to nail anything to the wall, and you don't want to put the you don't want to again, I don't really know what I'm trying to say, but you don't want to declare that Caleb Williams is the franchise quarterback in year one, but at the same time, everything seems to be pointing in that direction because everything that he struggled with, it's nothing paramount to where it can't be fixed. There's nothing that screams, yikes, he really needs this fixed, and I don't know if we can fix it. There seems to be everything with him uh, can be developed into the franchise quarterback that we all think he can be, and arguably already might be. Um, but yeah, uh, as for the press conferences for Thomas Brown, he, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think he said he's a guy with three abilities that he likes to talk about: dependability, responsibility, and accountability. And I think that really stuck out for him to come out in his first press conference as interim head coach to take accountability in the first 5 minutes of the press conference. I joked about it earlier in the day with these guys that it took him 5 minutes uh, and it took him 2.5 to 3 years faster than it took Matt Eberflus to take accountability for his actions on this Bears team, which, you know, it seems like it should be the bare minimum for an NFL head coach to take accountability, but at the very least, it was a step in the right direction for our interim to just go ahead and say that. And Isaac, you kind of mentioned it earlier that he said he also had a part in these collapses, these late game collapses, and I thought that was pretty big of him to kind of not just throw Matt Eberflus under the bus. Now, obviously, he was a huge part of that, but Thomas Brown was also on the staff, so he was also partly responsible for those collapses. So I thought it was uh, really big of him to say that in his press conference. Now we'll kind of switch gears. There you go. Thank you for the correction there, Joe. Coachability, accountability, and dependability. Those were the three abilities that Thomas Brown spoke about. Thanks. But we'll kind of switch gears more toward Thomas Brown and the head coaching search. And I think we can kind of tie this into one big conversation. There are 5 games left in the Bears season. And barring a 5-0 run, it seems like playoffs are pretty well out of the woods because the schedule ahead is very tough. Um, but what would it take? And I'll start with you, Isaac. What would it take from Thomas Brown to kind of cement himself as at least a contender for this head coaching job? There's been a lot of talk about interim head coaches and it not working out very well. And there's the conversation of Antonio Pierce and versus Thomas Brown. And I kind of want to put that to bed because I think Thomas Brown, although he's never been a head coach, he's had a lot more experience at this point in his career than Antonio Pierce did. I think he went straight from being a linebacker coach to an interim head coach, if I'm not correct. Uh, Look that up or whatever. But Thomas Brown has had a lot more experience, so I think it wouldn't be out of the conversation to make him a full-time head coach, whether that's with the Bears or anyone else. But uh, Isaac, what would it take from Thomas Brown to kind of show you that he deserves at least a shot to be the next full-time head coach of the Chicago Bears?
Look, so I want to say something first. I've talked with Bears fans on Twitter and stuff like that. Everyone has their own opinion when it comes to this. But at the end of the day, we all want the Bears to hire the best fit for our team at head coach. So people are gonna have different opinions. There's gonna be this side of people that want a coach with proven experience, which is probably gonna be someone like Mike Vrabel. There's gonna be another side of people that want the best offensive mind, like maybe someone like Ben Johnson and stuff like that. So this is gonna be a topic of discussion for a very long time until the Bears actually hire the head coach. Now that being said, what you were asking about Thomas Brown, I do think having a good record at the end of the year is going to be a big factor for him. I think if he goes um, like 3 or 2 or worse, I think it's gonna be hard for him to stay as a head coach. And you mentioned that the Bears have a tough schedule, and they do. I'm not disagreeing with that. But what I am gonna say is the Bears were able to win in against the Packers, Vikings, and Lions the first time around. Like we could have won those games, but we didn't. So this time around with Thomas Brown, I have more confidence that we can actually pull off these wins against our divisional opponents. Um, and I think one thing that will be essential for Thomas Brown to stay as the head coach is to beat the Packers. Now, it depends because the Packers might be able to rest their starters because it is the last game of the season. So if they do that, it's technically not, it's not the same. But if this is a game where the Packers need to win to make the playoffs or to get a better seed and they have all the starters playing, and the Bears walk into Lambeau Field with a interim head coach and beat them, for the first time since 2018. I think that's going to have a big effect on the organization. It's going to have a big effect on the fans. Some people are, they're going to be close-minded no matter what. They don't want Thomas Brown as head coach, and that's fine. That's their opinion. But I do think if we beat the Packers, that'll be a huge indication to me that I'll be at least comfortable with having Thomas Brown stay as a head coach. And like you mentioned, Eli, like the interim history isn't that good. Like there's coaches that have gone in and stayed, and it hasn't been well. We're seeing that right now with Antonio Pierce, but I have optimism for Thomas Brown. Like I mentioned earlier, I feel like just the way he carries himself and the way that players have basically said that they've rallied around Thomas Brown, it seems like it's all good signs from him so far. But I'm not gonna jump the gun and be like, okay, this is the guy that we should keep as head coach. We still need to see what he can do these last 5 games. It is going to be hard because he hasn't been the coach, obviously, the head coach, and there's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of dysfunction that was going on previously. There's probably going to be a lot of players that are frustrated from what has been going on up until this point, but we'll see. I'm very optimistic about it. I think, we'll talk about this the next episode, but going into that game against San Francisco, the Niners have not been playing well at all. They've been banged up. This is a good chance for the Bears to really show that they're a good team and that coaching was the factor that was holding them back. And now with the right guys in place, that they can actually do something. So that's basically my opinion on all the head coaching stuff. And I'll toss it over to you, Joe, and your thoughts on this.
Okay, well, first, I want to give you guys the background of Antonio Pierce and talk like a minute about what you guys are saying about how he's not really good at interim head coach because I want to defend him, even though we're not a Raiders podcast. I want to defend him. So he was a high school head coach, and then in 2018, 2019, he was a linebackers and recruiting coordinator at Arizona State. 2020, he was assistant head coach, co-defensive coordinator, linebackers coach, and recruiting coordinator at Arizona State. And then 2021, he was the associate head coach, defensive coordinator, and recruiting coordinator at Arizona State. Then in 2022 and 2023, he was the linebackers coach. And then he got promoted to interim head coach in 2023. Is now the head coach this year. I want to defend him real quickly because he, unlike the Bears, they don't really have a quarterback down there. So what they're going through this year isn't totally on him. Yes, he's a head coach, but he didn't get uh, blessed with a good situation. Derek Carr wanted to leave last year or no, Derek Carr left last year, or got traded away last year for Jimmy Garoppolo. Not one for one, but Jimmy Garoppolo came because Derek Carr wanted out. So that meant uh, sorry, that meant that Devontae Adams wasn't happy. So then Devontae Adams ended up getting traded this year. So they're already down their best receiver, and then they didn't really have a running game this year. Somehow they still played close against the Chiefs on Black Friday, but that's a different story. But yeah, Pierce just isn't in a good situation right now. I'm not going to say that he's not a good head coach. He just got a pretty bad hand this year. Now over to Thomas Brown. Unlike Isaac, I don't think wins and losses. I mean, obviously when we want to win games, but for Thomas Brown's head coaching ability, I don't think wins and losses matter as much this year. I agree with you about the Packers. I think if he beats the Packers, that goes a long way. But the reason I don't think they matter as much this year is because the way the head coach was for the most of this year, it sounds like he didn't really have the command of a lot. Well, maybe the first half of the season, but definitely the second half of the season, he didn't have command of the locker room and respected the players. If Thomas Brown can show both of those things and is a leader of men, which is the phrase that has been floating around for what the Bears are going to be looking for for the next head coach. The next 5 games, I think that will do a lot more than wins and losses. Now, yes, it's an NFL, wins and losses do matter. But I think if he goes 2-3, but shows he can lead the locker room and be a leader of men, that will put him in a very good standing. Now, if he wins more, obviously that increases the standing. But I don't think he needs to go 4-1, 5-0, or even 3-2 to put himself in a good position to be the next head coach. Now, I do think they're going to look at other places, but if he does what we think he's going to do, then he'll be in a decent position to start off with going in the offseason to be the next Bears head coach. I'll pass it over to you, Eli. And yeah.
Yeah, so I like both sides of this conversation because it is tough. You know, it feels like an uphill slope for an interim head coach to kind of get that gig. But Antonio Pierce did prove that it's possible, and I like all the positions that you brought up because it gives added context to their situation. Not a lot of talent over there, at least on the offensive side of the ball right now, since the departure of Devontae Adams and other players over the past few years. So uh, it is always important to add context to situations like that. Um, but I agree. I think, you know, record or no record, Thomas Brown has 5 games to kind of prove what he's all about and for the players to buy into his belief system. And it's going to be interesting to see how this locker room responds after, 2.5 years of Matt Eberflus and his hits principle and his philosophy that a lot of people have kind of made fun of over the past few seasons since we haven't had a lot of success. But I'm curious to kind of see again how the roster buys in and if they respond well, uh, even regardless of wins or losses. If they lose the next 5, what will there be in that locker room to kind of show you that at the very least they've bought in and Thomas Brown is someone that you can kind of buy into. Now, I don't necessarily think they're going to lose the next 5. I think, this, as you mentioned, Isaac, this 49ers game coming up is a lot more winnable than it seemed at the beginning of the year. And you mentioned it too. The NFC North Division matchups have been closer than expected this season. And then Seattle, again, they're on the right track right now, but they kind of seem to be a roller coaster at times. I think that game is one of those that could go either way, depending on which Seattle team shows up. Uh, but long story short, again, these next 5 games are going to prove pivotal for whatever it is that happens with Thomas Brown. And I thought it was interesting today when he was asked about, this whole head coaching search and everything having to do with him being a potential candidate. He kind of just brushed it off and said, I am where my feet are, and whatever happens, happens. I'm just going to be the coach of the Chicago Bears in the meantime and do everything I can to put my team in the best possible position to succeed, which I thought was the perfect answer. If he would have said, I'm not even gonna consider staying here, or, I would love to be the next head coach of the Chicago Bears, that kind of thing. I think he answered it in the most perfect way possible. But kind of putting Thomas Brown aside, the head coaching search this season is going to be one of, if not the most important in franchise history. And, that seems like a phrase that we've said a lot as Bears fans, and it just has never seemed to work out. Obviously, the only Super Bowl winning head coach in our history is Mike Ditka, and that was in 1985. That was a long time ago, so that's not something we can really hang our hat on, in my opinion. But the last coach for the Chicago Bears that kind of seemed to have it all put together, at least in my opinion, was Lovie Smith. that seemed to be a guy that the players bought into his system. Uh, it was a decent offense with a strong defensive mind, and he just had his players on the right track. Uh, Made an NFC Championship appearance, made a Super Bowl appearance. Almost, he's been there and was the most consistent head coach we've had since Ditka. So this head coaching search will be the most important, at least in a long time, for the Chicago Bears. And Joe, I'll start with you. What are your top candidates for this coaching job in this hiring cycle? There's a lot of big names, but we've kind of given our opinions off air. But I'll start with you. Kind of your top candidates for this head coaching job for the Bears.
That's tough because you don't really know what you're gonna get from a lot of these guys. Obviously, like that's what it is with all head coaching searches. You know, unless you hire a proven guy, you don't really know what you're gonna get. I think Ben Johnson will be a good hire. Everyone does, but I think Ben Johnson will be a good hire. Marcus Freeman, who is the Notre Dame head coach, has been floating around. Who was drafted by the Bears in 2000 and I don't know the exact year. Someone could look that up real
I
quick. I
think it
think
was
it's like oh
2009.
09. I was gonna say oh 06 or oh 08 or oh 09. Oh 06 or oh 08. So if it's oh 09, then yeah, he was drafted by the Bears in oh 09. Um, and then Mike Vrabel has been uh rumored or talked about too. We kind of talked about the. I don't I don't know if we talked about that here. We talked about it beforehand. Uh, I don't really know if I want Vrabel. Like he's a good. He's a leader of men for sure, but throughout his 6 seasons in Tennessee, he really didn't have a great offense. I mean, they had the best running back in the league, there and Derrick Henry. He's still the best running back in the league, and they only made the playoffs 3 times in those 6 years. And each one of those 3 times, I think they were either first or second round exits. So I don't want that. Yes, he can lead the team, and yes, he can lead the team, but I just don't know if I want to be a first or second round exit in the playoffs. I want to make it to the Super Bowl at some point. I just don't know if he'll get uh, assemble the right staff to do that. Now, I could be wrong, and it could go really well if the Bears hire Ray Roll, but I don't know. I wouldn't be totally out. I wouldn't be totally in either. Um, and then Liam Cohen, I think, would be a decent hire too. He's been doing a great job with Tampa Bay and Baker Mayfield this year. I mean, Baker Mayfield did have a resurgence last year, uh, too, but Liam Cohen is continuing that this year, and he gave Tampa a running game which they did not have at all last year. And now Tampa does have a bit of a different, uh, a bit more at running back this year, so that's kind of why. But still, he's been giving them a running game, and been doing some. He's been running some cool plays and pretty calling a pretty good offense down there. So I take Liam Cohen too. Uh, I think those are my top guys right now. I I'm trying to think of. I can't think of anyone else. How about you, Isaac?
Yeah, so going back to what I said earlier, everyone's gonna have different opinions, and at the end of the day, we just want the best head coach. And so I'm gonna disagree with Joe a little bit on one uh, head coach, but besides that, it's pretty much the same. So I feel like everyone has Ben Johnson at the top of their list, and I agree with that. I think Ben Johnson is such a good offensive mind, and he's such like the obvious like hire that we've gone to a point where we're like starting to go around it. We're like, he hasn't been a head coach, or maybe he's not gonna be a good leader and stuff like that. I think if we have the opportunity to hire Ben Johnson, I think we should. And Eli and I were talking about this earlier, like if Ben like even if the Bears messed up, like at least they got what everyone wanted, kind of in the sense like we try like this is the guy you guys wanted, but didn't work out. But I think Ben Johnson would work out. I think he would help Caleb Williams tremendously. Um, Another guy is Thomas Brown. I'm really rooting for him, and I really hope that he turns this team around. And if we were to end up just keeping him, I think I would be okay with it. I would probably even go to say I would be happy with it. I don't think I would be disappointed at all. And next season, imagine like if he just like this team just starts popping off and Thomas Brown is the head coach and everyone's like, oh my gosh, like we've had this guy in this build in our building and he's really gone through a lot of adversity, going through all these changes in the past couple weeks and hopefully, he ends up this going like 5-0 this season. That's crazy, but that's my thought on Thomas Brown. And the thing I'm gonna disagree with Joseph is, or with Joe is, Mike Vrabel. I would say that it would, okay, this is my thing on Mike Vrabel. Like, he's not an offensive mind. So if we hire him as head coach, we would have to really hire a really good offensive coordinator because it's kind of like a two for one thing. Like, if we hire Thomas Brown or Ben Johnson, they're already good offensive minds, so we would have that dealt with and solved. With Mike Vrabel, it would have to be a little bit different. Like, we would have to get a good offensive coordinator. Um, but if the Bears really want someone with proven experience, someone that knows how to lead a team, I think he would be a good option. I don't think any of us would disagree with that. And then in terms of what Joe was saying about Mike Vrabel and not having the best running back and stuff like that, he also had Mike Tannehill at quarterback, which I don't think Tannehill was the best at all. And the Titans were originally like they were the first seed, I think in 2019 or 2020 or something like that. I think it was 2020. Um, and they did have a couple of, like first round exits and stuff like that. They did beat Tom Brady in the playoffs. When I think that was his last season in New England, so that was pretty cool. But I wouldn't be mad if we hired Mike Vrabel. I think I would be okay with it. I would wish that we would have gotten someone like Ben Johnson, but that's my thoughts on Mike Vrabel. And then as in terms of like the other head coaching options, I think we should just stay away from guys that don't really have a lot of experience. Like Liam Cohen was the offensive coordinator for the Bucks this year, and I do think he's a good coordinator, but he was the head coach for Kentucky the year prior. I don't want to hire anyone from college football either. I think we need to hire someone from the NFL at least. So I wouldn't be happy if we got someone like Marcus Freeman. Or Lincoln Riley. I know people were saying, "Oh, well, Caleb Williams is really close with Lincoln Riley." I wouldn't want that either. Um, so really, I would my only three options would be Mike Vrabel, Thomas Brown, and Ben Johnson. In terms of coaches that might be fired, obviously like Kyle Shanahan would be at the top of like everyone's list if he were to be fired. That would be an excellent signing. I think him and Caleb Williams could do wonders, especially with the way Kyle Shanahan has helped Mr. Irrelevant Brock Purdy turn into what he is today. Excluding, I know the Niners have a lot of pieces on offense and stuff like that, but he was still Mr. Irrelevant, and he has been a pretty good NFL quarterback at that. So, another coach that I would like would be Kevin Stefanski. I don't know if the Browns would fire him, but I really think that he had something going with the Browns before trading for Deshaun Watson and all that stuff. But I like Stefanski. I think he's a good head coach, and I wouldn't be mad if he were to be fired if the Bears would end up hiring him. But I'll toss it over to you, Eli, and your thoughts on who you would like at head coach and maybe some guys you won't.
Yeah. So to me, I'll kind of start with Vrabel. I think, at some points that Titans roster wasn't great, and for Vrabel to have the success that he did with that roster, I believe it was in 19 and 2020 season. He actually took that team to the AFC Championship, and they lost to the Chiefs 35-24. So I think with the personnel they had, um, it was pretty impressive to me. And Vrabel is just a guy to me that has stood out. Um, he's just a strong mind. He's a strong football mind, whether that's offensive or defensive. And it just seemed like he had his players ready to go. And there at the end of his tenure, he was kind of overreached with personnel decisions. Obviously, one of the worst Titans moves in franchise history was trading away AJ Brown to the Philadelphia Eagles and then immediately drafting Traylon Burks. That experiment did not work. And Ryan Tannehill was not involved in that. He that was the last person that wanted AJ Brown traded away. Um, so I'm not saying that Mike Vrabel was my top choice, but if he were hired, it's not a slam dunk hire by any means, but it seems very consistent with a type of hire that the Bears would make based on previous experiences. Um, I think, um, let's see here. I think that my two candidates that I absolutely would not want are one, Cliff Kingsbury, and two, Bill Belichick. Now you can make the argument, for either one. I think Belichick has the stronger argument, obviously. He's been there, done that. Uh, I think he was a good head coach, and I just don't think that his personality would mesh well um, with what the Bears want to do. I think he is just a guy that wants total control, and I just don't think it would work out very well. Now, obviously, we've talked about Ben Johnson and all of the top hires. Yeah, I think Isaac kind of alluded to it. You don't need to overthink this one. I think if Ben Johnson is available and he's interested, then that needs to be the guy because everyone, as silly as it might sound, uh, Ben Johnson is just the easy hire to me, and that's something that the Bears just need to accept. Uh, if it doesn't work out, then you can say that you didn't look like an idiot. Again, as crazy as that sounds, just make just make the easy hire so that everyone at least thinks that you've got the potential. And then if it doesn't work out, again, you can say, well, that's what everyone wanted us to do. So I guess everyone is an idiot. Yeah, it's as crazy as it sounds. I think that's just the way it should go. And I completely agree that I think we should stay out of the college realm just because of the situation we're in. Now, if we were in year 3 or 4 of the Caleb Williams experiment, and he has established himself as the guy, and he's on the brink of you know postseason runs and Super Bowl runs, then hire a guy to where you think can accentuate that talent. I guess again, I'd stay away from college, but uh, that's kind of where my head's at. Just make the easy hire, please. The NFL media and the NFL league as a whole, you can make yourself look like geniuses if it works out, and if it doesn't, then you can't really be mad at anyone but Ben Johnson, I guess, in that situation. One more thing I kind of wanted to touch on that I thought maybe might be a possible avenue. Say if we hired a guy like Vrabel or Ben Johnson, and Thomas Brown wanted to stay as offensive coordinator for another year. Last season, obviously the two, you can't really compare the two very much, but Ben Johnson had opportunities to go and take a head coaching job. And he decided to stay in Detroit because of their offensive success. And he wants to finish the business. He wants to win a Super Bowl with Detroit and maybe look elsewhere. And I think that's still a very real possibility. Uh, Maybe Thomas Brown wants to give himself another year to kind of boost his rating among the NFL. Uh, and maybe he would be willing to stick with Caleb Williams and help him develop. And then, if Caleb Williams is an all pro next year, then he'll be at the top of that cycle. And people will want Thomas Brown to aid their QB's development and that kind of conversation. Now, I don't know what the league thinks, at least of Thomas Brown when it comes to head coaching candidacies this season. But it is something that is super interesting that I'd like to see in the coming weeks when we get into this head coaching search. But with that being said, do you guys have anything else before we kind of get out of here? Joe, I know you have something here.
No, all I want to say is, yeah, when my little tangent about Gabriel, I was wrong. He did make the AFC Championship, like Eli said. Uh, I guess I kind of forgot about that. So looked it up on Google and it did not show. So I don't know why Google wouldn't show it to me, but Wikipedia would. Um, but yeah. But my point still stands. I wouldn't hire. I don't know if I would be super thrilled with the hire. But yeah, I do agree with everything you guys said about all the candidates, and Ben Johnson is definitely the easy hire.
Yeah, and I'm not saying by any means that Mike Vrabel was the absolute key piece, in making the AFC Championship, and he's the reason they were there. It takes a whole squad. Maybe if they didn't have Derrick Henry, they probably wouldn't have made it. If they didn't have AJ Brown on that team, they probably wouldn't have made it. That's the reality of the NFL. Again, Vrabel, not the top of my list. He's probably right there in the middle. If they hired him, I'd be like, okay, let's see how it works out. I don't necessarily think it'd be a good or a bad hire. So that's kind of my thoughts on Vrabel. Now, one thing I did want to kind of show, I did have this pulled up. Let's see here. It has to do with Caleb Williams. We've talked about the head coaching uh, candidacies and Williams being a big focal point of that. So before we get out of here, I wanted to touch on some records that Caleb Williams did break in this Thanksgiving matchup against Detroit. 232 consecutive pass attempts without an interception for a rookie quarterback. That beats Kyler Murray and CJ Stroud, who almost broke it last year. So now Caleb Williams is still at that streak. Hopefully, he can keep that going and set a rookie record that won't be broken a long time. It seemed to be overlooked just because of the little offensive success we had in the last few weeks prior to Thomas Brown taking over. Uh, but it is impressive nonetheless because he seems to be on the track of not turning the ball over as much as he had been early in the year. Another one, 14 passing touchdowns by a rookie quarterback for the Bears. Now that doesn't seem super impressive, but this broke the record by Charlie O'Rourke in 1942. So that record hadn't been touched in however many years, a long time at the very least. Another record, 5 multi-passing touchdown performances by Williams, which broke the record that was first set by Mitchell Trubisky in 2017 or 2018, I guess would be. Let's see how that. I don't know how that is factored in there because it says 2018, but Mitch was a rookie in 2017, so not sure how that works out. But anyway, let's see, 30 fourth quarter points totaled by the Bears over the last 2 weeks, the most in the NFL. And then there's some other records also that weren't set by Williams. But just to put into perspective, in the last few weeks and for the season as a whole, there have been struggles and ups and downs as are kind of expected by a rookie quarterback. So I think we need to keep in mind that as tumultuous as it has seemed, Caleb Williams is on the right track for his development. For as much as Matt Eberflus tried to stifle that development, as well as Shane Waldron. He's still on track to finish with, I think, like 3,600 some odd yards. And I want to say like 20 some odd touchdowns and 7 interceptions on the year. I think it's like 20 and 7. Isaac, do you have that exact number?
Yeah, I wrote an article about that
There you go.
on Monday, but it's an exclusive rookie quarterback club that I labeled it as the 3,700 passing yards, 20 touchdowns, and 10 interception club. So only 2 other rookies have done that in NFL history. It was Justin Herbert and CJ Stroud. They've thrown for over 300 or 3,700 passing yards. They've thrown for over 20 touchdowns, and they've thrown less than 10 interceptions. And Caleb Williams is on track to do that. He's on track to get 3,700 passing yards, 20 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. So that would put him in that club with Justin Herbert and CJ Stroud, and I hope he makes it. And yeah, that's basically what you were talking about.
Yeah, and that just speaks volumes for him to come in as a rookie and be in that exclusive club right away. Uh, Again, speaks volumes to the type of quarterback he is right now, and for the years to come, which I think a lot of people have said he hasn't even tapped into the potential that we think he can be. So it is really special. A lot of people right now don't consider him to be in the Offensive Rookie of the Year conversation just because of the record, I would say. Uh, but if our record were better, I think he'd be right there in that conversation. Bo Nix has played very well this season. A lot of people didn't expect that. Drake May is not a consideration, but he's played well in the time that he's been active. And obviously, Jaden Daniels has cooled off a little bit, but he's had a great year as well. So this quarterback class so far as a whole has really impressed me. And I didn't think there were going to be 2, let alone 3 or 4 phenomenal quarterbacks in this class. So maybe it can be another 2020 year, and future or past classes like that, it can be another historic one. But do you guys have anything else regarding Caleb Williams, the head coaching search, or anything having to do with that Detroit game, or there's so much news that happened that we can talk about. But Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, the last thing I want to touch upon is while I'm glad that Caleb broke consecutive passes without an interception record, he got real lucky with that. He's had over the past 2 games about 4 passes that probably should have been picked off. Definitely one against the Vikings, and then a couple on Thanksgiving should have been picked off. They just weren't. The past 2, it was that pass to DJ Moore on the sideline where Kobe Joseph almost jumped didn't jump the route, but came over and almost intercepted it. He didn't intercept it, but that was close to being an interception. And then I think there was 1 or 2 more. I just don't remember the exact play, but that was the most memorable play in the Thanksgiving game. But still, he's gotten lucky, but it's still good to see that he broke the record.
Absolutely, and that's football. You know, it's a game of almost, and that's definitely a factor in that. And I'm sure it was for Kyler Murray and C.J. Stroud as well. But as you said, a record broken, and that's something we can put our hat on at the end of the day. But again, with that being said, I think that is going to do it for the Bear Down Buzz podcast, unless you guys have anything else. All right. Again, that's going to do it this week for the Bear Down Buzz podcast. Thanks so much for joining us as usual. Go like our social media, like our shorts, YouTube, Reels, everything having to do with that, TikTok. Check out these guys on Twitter, and they write great articles as well, so go find them on their Twitter accounts. But with that being said, next week we will preview what seems like a pretty winnable matchup against the San Francisco 49ers in California. They've been very banged up, lots of injuries. You know, Christian McCaffrey and Jordan Mason both went down. So they've got some big names out against us this week and for the rest of the year. But we'll get into that next week. With that being said, this has been the Bear Down Buzz podcast, and we will see you as we preview the 49ers versus Bears matchup on Sunday. With that being said, we'll see you next time.